everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Visual Studio Toolbox Extensibility Edition, because we are back with another episode of our Visual Studio Extensibility mini series where we have been diving through all of the brand new samples that you can check out in the links below and talking essentially about how you can extend pretty much any aspect of Visual Studio that you want. So, in the last episode, we talked about extending the editor window, and we are continuing that discussion, except we're going to hone in on the little margin in the editor window and how you can extend that. So, joining me once again is Etienne from the editor team. Hey again, long time no see.
Hey again, good to see you again.
Sweet. I know it's been like 2 whole minutes since we last hit
Yes.
record. Sweet. So, what are we talking about today? I kind of mentioned editor margins, but is there a little more to it than that, or is it really that straightforward?
Yeah, so we're back into this sample solution for Visual Studio, and yeah, I made for you an extension that would basically add something to the margin of the text editor of Visual Studio. Let me just show you quickly what this extension does. So here I have Visual Studio with my extension, and basically I have this document with a bunch of text inside, and here is my extension at the bottom. So it's basically just a small UI components that is being added to the margin of the editor and that shows the number of words that you have in your active documents.
Nice. And is it only that
So
margin that we're referring to for this particular conversation, or does that include like the left side margin of the editor?
it's well, it includes everything, but in this particular example, we just see how to do it at the bottom right, but you will see that it's not complicated to make it anywhere else.
Cool.
So how about we just dive into this?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So just as a quick reminder, the first thing I need to do is to define and tell to Visual Studio, hey, I have a next step for you. And here is basically just a class I created, which inherits from extension and which I define some metadata that tells what is the name of my extension, for example. Again, you can refer to some previous video that we made in the past where we dive into these aspects in detail. So I will just gloss over this.
Mhm.
So now let's look, I guess, at perhaps what is more interesting here is how do I add something at the bottom right of my text editor? And for this, I need to create another class that will inherit from ExtensionPart, and it will implement multiple interfaces that you have here. So there is one called the TextView margin provider and open close listener and change listener. All these are made for your TextView, which again is the visual parts of the text editor of Visual Studio. So let me look perhaps at explain you the let me explain you a little bit about this. So the margin provider, the TextView margin provider specifically, is specifically here for telling Visual Studio that okay, I want to extend something into the margin. But as you may guess, if I go into my extension here and into Visual Studio, sorry, and type an extra word, like right now I have 68 words in my document. If I type an extra word, now I have 69. And why does this happen? That's because we're also listening to the changes into the document. And for this, we are doing two things. We are using this interface which actually listen to documents that we get that are getting open and getting closed. That allow me, for example, to load up whatever I need and then maybe clear out information that I don't need anymore. And then the TextView change listener, which allows me to simply listen for whenever there is some change to text documents. Do you follow so far?
Yep, that is making perfect sense. So just having something that's listening to what the user is doing so that it can react accordingly seems pretty important.
Exactly. Now with the extensibility model that we have, now we also have to define in what document do you want your extension to apply. Because for example, right now I have a simply text document, but who knows, maybe you want to apply only for C# document or this awesome language you are creating. And for this, I can do that by implementing this text view extension configuration. And here I'm basically telling Visual Studio, okay, in what for what document do I want my extension to apply? Here, for example, I'm just saying that I want to apply this for text. But if I
Mhm.
want, I can actually try other things like globe pattern, in which case I can put some parameters like, star slash test slash start dot foo, for example. And this will simply tell, okay, my extension will only apply to documents that are finishing by .foo and that are into the text folder. So that give a lot of possibility onto what you can do.
Cool. So, like in the last video, we talked a lot about how you could use regex and just general logic commands to get really specific about when the extension is activated or visible, enabled, disabled, all that. So, same kind of applies here in terms of like what
Yes,
documents does this apply to and stuff. That's cool.
exactly. So this is just to basically tell to just you when to wake up my extension. And now in the next one, I will be able to define where does my margin should go. So here I have a constructor in which I'm telling it I want to put the margin at the bottom right corner. So we basically be into this area here that you see with my mice.
Mhm.
Um, Now I can go even further and be more precise. And I can, for example, tell that, oh, my extension should be before the default row that I have here. And so before basically means to the left of it. And so that's how I get to the left here. But I could do something like I could go ahead and type after, and in this case, it will appear after it, so to the right of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so the next part, now that I've defined where my margin will go, I should also define what does my margin look like. And for this, I have this create visual element async, which is also a method that comes from this interface. I have to implement it.
Mhm.
And in this specific case, what I'm doing is that I'm basically creating my data model in which I will basically set, I will count the number of words that there are in my document. I will store this into fields, and then I will return a, UI element. Now, something interesting is that if you remember what we told into the previous videos, in Visual Studio with the new extensibility model, extensions are working in a separated process. So regarding UI with WPF, that makes it a little bit tricky. And the solution for this is that instead of using a classic user control, we use a remote user control, which is a specific control that we made for remoting the UI. And I invite you to watch some other videos that we did in the past, where we actually dive into how the UI is made um, deeply into how does it work for remoting it. Do you have any question before I continue?
Not too many. Just going back real quick, just because we talked about it earlier. You're not beholden to the bottom right corner margin for as far as
Yeah, no,
extending
no, I'm
the
not.
margin.
Sorry.
Yep. Yeah, and so
So
you can
I'm not
do that
limited to just
the
the bottom.
bottom. Yep, so I'm assuming there's like a bottom left corner command or, like a sidebar margin. I don't know all the official names, but
Yeah,
all these options.
there are, yes. So you have multiple options here. I can do the left, for example, which would be in this area. I can do the right, and I could do even the scroll bar. So you can also put something into the scroll bar that appears here
Oh,
if you want
sweet.
to extend this. Yeah, so that could be a use case where, for example, when I search something to my text editor, usually the thing that match what I search, for example, appears as brown here into the scroll bar. That's something you could imagine extending with this API.
Totally. Yeah, I'd imagine you could do a lot of stuff, like, maybe you could view, like, exceptions from that, mini map scroll bar, whatever you call it.
Yeah,
But
yeah, that's a good idea.
yeah, that's pretty sweet.
Uh,
I especially
okay.
like it for being able to view errors and warnings and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so here then the next part is that, here we just created the UI element, but we create this only once when basically the user open the document. And so we counted the word once. But what happened if the user go ahead and do some change in your text document, just type into his documents. Well, this is where the I text view change listener becomes useful. Because here I can get this method being executed every time that the user is, typing into his editor. And every time that I'm getting this, I will basically, count again the words that are in my documents and update the information. And then this information will again be displayed directly into my UI because I binded it into the example that we have here. That property what can appear here. So it's binded and then can appear automatically into the UI. And so then another thing I wanted to highlight is, just for the sake of the demonstration, we're basically storing all this data model. We're storing them into a dictionary right now. This dictionary, you probably want to clear it when the user closes the document, because otherwise it will just stay there alive for the eternity, and that's not necessarily good. And this is where, again, the TextView open close listener becomes useful, because now I have two methods I can use, one for when the text document is getting open and one when the text document is getting closed. And when it's getting closed, simply I will remove my data model from my dictionary that I have into memory. And that's just allow me to clear off. Of course, you could potentially do that differently, could have a different approach. But again, for the demonstration, I thought that was a good idea to show a use case of these three interfaces at once.
Makes sense. So you can have actions from the moment that the proper document is opened to the moment that that document is closed.
Exactly.
Have different actions or similar actions or none of the above.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I like that there's definitely still a lot of liberty in where you can place all these actions that you want to have with your extension, and also just how detailed you can get with it. Because, yeah, there might be a situation where once the document's closed, you want to close out all of the operations that you just did, or like free up some memory, maybe, or store things accordingly and kind of
Exactly.
like that. So it's great that there's all these different commands and listeners that can handle all that for you. Sweet. Anything else that we should know about?
I don't think so. Maybe you notice that, again, this method doesn't do anything in particular. And this is just because I'm using my create visual element here to initialize the count of word. But that's definitely something I could have done here too. It really depends on what you want to do. But this one has to be here just because it's part of these interfaces. But technically, I'm not doing anything with it. So yeah, no, I think I covered everything if I'm not wrong.
I think because it is part of the editor at the end of the day, too, this seems like a pretty critical setup to have for future extension or for future extension creation out there, right? I mean, I think
Oh yeah.
there's just lots of things just inherent to VS that I can think of that involve just the
Yeah.
editor margins, like inherit like the inheritance margin icon and stuff, for example, because that's currently on your screen. So yeah, the possibilities seem pretty endless.
Yeah, definitely there are a lot of things you can do with the extensibility model we have. And of course, I understand for support this method you may not be able to guess them just by from head. But the good thing is that we have a pretty good documentation here. For example, if you are curious about TextView open close listener, we have a documentation for it that kind of re-explain a little bit everything that I already explained. But yeah, if the video is not enough, you can also dive into this and learn a lot about the extensibility that we have.
I do love good documentation, so that's always great to have on.
Yeah, that's something
Sweet.
we're trying to improve also.
Well, Etienne, thank you so much for sharing all of this. I think this is, again, really key info for writing your next extension, especially when it's editor based and like with the margins, especially. That's a great entry point for a lot of extensions, as so many extenders out there have used. So it's cool to see, again, another streamlined version of how to do that. Awesome. So see you on Tuesday. Yeah, sweet. And then shout out to the viewers for still watching, following along. Thanks for watching. Please go write your own extension, share your feedback. The links to all of these samples that we're demoing through is below. And stay tuned for the next episode of our mini series where we cover even more ways to extend Visual Studio. So until next time, happy coding.